Hello everybody and welcome to Snap Together Sunday. There is a poster behind it that should not be there. 1 second. Well, actually, you can't see it now, it doesn't matter, but whatever. Hello everybody and welcome to Snap Together Sunday. There is a poster behind it that should not be there. 1 second. Well, actually, you can't see it now, it doesn't matter, but whatever. Okay. Sorry about that. Something was overlapping there. Anyway, welcome to Snap Together Sunday. Tonight I'm going to finish building the Real Grade Gundam Epyon. Yay! As you can see, just needs his backpack really, but that's, still a lot of work, so let's not beat around the bush. Actually, I will beat around the bush. I lied. I had meant to do this, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. It didn't work out, so here we are, Sunday. I got the day off. Maybe you don't have the day off. I apologize if you don't have the day off. But I have the day off tomorrow on account of it almost being my birthday, so yeah. Now, let's stop beating around the bush and get into this. Switch to camera view. And put this here. Okay. And while that's running, why is my face cam not showing up? Why is my face cam not showing up? There we go. Focus, damn it. Now let me get some entertainment going here. All right, I am all set here. Let me put this over to the side. Change to studio mode. Put this. All right. Now then, put that to the side, unless I need it. It
1980 almost destroyed the Olympics.
Tanks and troops crossed the border on December 27th.
It took a war, but a lot more too.
This, in my opinion, is the most serious threat to world peace since the Second World War.
It's political panic.
Timing of this suggests a political motive.
And intrigue.
The timing of today's White House event was fortuitous.
3 key deadlines shaped the history of sport and politics.
You're not going to get the opportunity to compete.
It isn't just history, though. I've started to look at this as kind of a guide as to how the international order can unravel.
The Olympic Games is a great political event.
Through a few
my mic as always
big
until you need
mistakes.
The biggest crisis in 6 years.
The first deadline is the most important, but I want to show you this. It is the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow cookbook and schedule of events. It's put together by the US athletes when they thought that they were going to be going to the Moscow Olympics, and as a result, it's like a portal to a parallel universe in which the boycott never happened. You will find a ton of weird recipes in here. Elephant ears, it's a type of cookie, I think. Chicken surprise, and Philadelphia cheesecake.
Russian tanks and troops crossed the border into neighboring Afghanistan on December 27th, 1979.
About 7 months before the Summer Olympics began, the Soviet Union effectively started a war in Afghanistan, which, remember, was right next door to them. They were effectively attaching the strings for a puppet state. I want to try to introduce you also in the video.
Sure.
So I'm making this video that is about sports and geopolitics, which is very firmly the turf of your channel of Search Party. My first question I wanted to ask you was, how do I make a USSR map?
Every project I ever made, this is in the folder in case I need it, and I use it all the time. So I'll send it to you.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think this video is really about the almost decade-long war. I mean, I couldn't explain it better than Rambo 3 anyway.
I don't know how much you know about Afghanistan. Most people can't even find it on the map. But over 2 million civilians, mostly peasant farmers and their families, have been systematically slaughtered by invading Russian armies.
It, it didn't go well.
You can't defeat a people like that. We tried. We already had our Vietnam.
More than the war, I'm interested in the impact that it had on American policy and the Olympics.
This invasion is an extremely serious threat to peace.
Immediately, the United States and Carter were asking how to deal with this without turning the Cold War hot, and that's a really delicate balance. You actually can't do something that is too harsh.
The successful negotiation of the SALT II Treaty has been a major goal and a major achievement of this administration.
They didn't want to threaten SALT II, the big arms treaty that was signed but undelivered, in part due to the invasion.
We will, of course, keep the ratification of SALT II under active review in consultation with the leaders of the Senate.
So they looked to the impact of economic denial measures. As you can see in this early January memo, the first recommendation was limiting grain, which happened.
The undelivered grain will be removed from the market.
But there was a problem. It wasn't enough, and it wasn't the perfect tool. The grain embargo was a political liability.
Iowa has replaced New Hampshire as the state where we start the elimination process of choosing our next president.
Carter was facing a primary challenge from Senator Ted Kennedy, and Iowa would not like a grain embargo. Carter was also already seen as weak due to the Iran hostage crisis, and he needed something stronger than fishing restrictions to hit the Soviets with. That led the administration to consider a widespread boycott of the Moscow Olympics to tarnish the leadership's image. These memos and this idea started circulating like wildfire that the United States would lead a big boycott of the Olympics that would force either the Olympics to change or the USSR to abandon their adventure in Afghanistan.
When the Soviets marched into Afghanistan, they perhaps unwittingly threw their own policy of détente into turmoil.
Security advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, he's more of a hawk, and he immediately suggested reconsideration of Olympic participation. On January 10th, Vice President Walter Mondale set out a trial balloon to move the Olympics. By mid-January, Secretary of State Cyrus Vance was trying to get the UK on board to a boycott as well. And so on January 20th, a day before the Iowa caucuses, Carter set his first deadline.
That unless the Soviets withdraw their troops within a month from Afghanistan, that the Olympic Games be moved from Moscow to an alternate site or multiple sites, or postponed or canceled.
So now Carter, he's kind of at this crisis point. He has to push either the IOC or the USSR to do what he wants, and the only tool that he has is an Olympic boycott. Congress stamped yes on a resolution of support a few days later. They started trying to get other countries to join them. China supported the call on February 1st, 1980, with the argument that the Olympics would be propaganda for the brutal Soviet effort. The United States then sent boxer Muhammad Ali to African nations to try to get them to support the boycott. This is just what they did. This was their strategy. And this weird idea of a trip, it is kind of a window to understand all the ways that the boycott ended up sort of breaking the Olympics, not really destroying them or changing them. Ali reported that he was turned away by the president of Tanzania. When he was on the ground, he said, "If I'm to be looked on as an Uncle Tom or a traitor or someone against my black brothers, I want out now, for that's not my purpose." Carter received Ali in the White House on February 11th, but it was clear that this was going to be harder than they thought. Just a week before the deadline, few nations responded. But Carter was locked in, right? And Carter had another problem approaching with the next deadline. he technically couldn't stop the United States from going to the Olympics. All right, so this is a first for me. I've never used a pan like this before. I was so surprised that you even remembered the recipe. I had assumed that this would just be a fake thing that somebody made up for the book, but this was an actual recipe that you used.
There's my copy.
Wow. You can tell it's been used.
There it is. The other side. Yeah. Few notes on it.
Here is an American. He's George Mount. He's 23 years old. He's from Lafayette, California.
I competed in 1976 in the Montreal Olympics.
But this is not an American sport.
And nobody finished in the top 60 since like 1912.
The American finished an incredible sixth. George Mount.
And I was always considered, in the top 5, top 10 potential winners of the 1980 Olympics. So I was geared up. I was ready to race.
The next deadline was May 24th, 1980. The deadline for national Olympic committees to accept or decline their invitations to compete in the Olympics. Every country had to decide what to do. Here is where it gets a little more complicated. You see, the United States and Carter, imagine them over here. The Olympics was run by the International Olympic Committee, which coordinates with national Olympic committees. Carter is not officially in charge.
It was now up to the National Olympic Committee of each country to decide whether to send their athletes to Moscow or not.
So now Carter, in addition to trying to get these other nations to join into the boycott, he's got to convince his own National Olympic Committee to vote for the boycott. And that gets a lot harder after something that happens just a few days after that February 20th deadline. In 1980, the Winter and Summer Olympics were still in the same year. There was Moscow and the Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York. The miracle on ice, when the United States beat the USSR in hockey, upset the Olympic narrative just a few days after President Carter's deadline. First, it showed that competition could be the best way to beat the USSR. And secondly, it gave these newly famous athletes a voice.
President Carter had all of the American Olympic team participants to the White House.
The winter athletes in general just don't feel that a boycott is the right thing.
On March 8th, the head of the State Department task force on the boycott said, "The starch seems to slowly be going out of our boycott effort. Commitment to alternative games, that was over."
An alternative world-class competition for them this summer.
One of the things that he's floating is this idea of permanently putting the Olympics in Athens. Your video that actually just came out is all about the cities that are bidding for the Olympics in different places.
And so my question is, why doesn't anyone want this anymore? When I dug into the research, that has a lot to do with kind of this boom and bust cycles of the Olympics. And the cycles have been going on long enough now where very smart people are saying, what if we just stop this whole circus and have the Olympics in the same spot every year? That's currently something that's being discussed right now.
Okay, so I'm editing this video right now. There is this whole rabbit hole that I could have gone down when it comes to alternative games, all these different efforts to kind of take out the Olympics, and they are fascinating, but I thought it would be too much of a weird digression to the story. So I have written an article on Patreon that gives you a little taste of what was going on. This is something I've been doing lately, where I publish a newsletter. It's entirely free, and you can find out when I have a new video that comes out and also get an article that gets into some of the stuff that I couldn't get into in the main video. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. First of all, so that people know about Patreon. That's why I put a little ad bar down here below the screen, but also so that I can kind of get out news about videos. And if I ever do anything bigger with the Patreon, I'll be able to let people know. So that's kind of my idea and my pitch. Check that out. It is totally free to sign up for it, and you can read this for free. There will be a link down in the description. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get back to it just to set the stakes. So Carter is there, and he's got to figure out how to push these athletes into doing what he wants. So on March 21st, Carter tried to push the athletes into abiding by his deadline.
People that I love and admire like you, are required to share in disappointment and in personal sacrifice.
I voted for Carter, but I'll tell you what, if I saw him at any time in the future, he and I would have had words.
I understand how you feel.
It's very frustrating to be sacrificed as a poor, and poor, let me tell you, poor. I mean, sleeping in your car, living in bike shops and sleeping in cars and sleeping in people's, closets and stuff, to get by. And, here these people are playing with your lives, thousands of people's lives.
It's not a pleasant time for me.
The boycott was not popular with the public anymore, but Carter had boxed himself into the US boycott. So behind the scenes, Carter was doing stuff like threatening to revoke Olympic athletes' passports. Before the deadline hit, he got what he wanted.
On April 12th, backing President Carter's boycott, the U.S. Olympic Committee voted not to go to Moscow.
Once the boycott was announced, I basically washed my hands of the amateur version part of the sport and said, and I'm done with this. I had the option. I made a phone call to Italy and I got a pro contract immediately because I had the bona fides to get a pro contract.
Other national Olympic committees decided differently leading up to that deadline.
On May 14th, France defied President Giscard's advice and voted to go to Moscow. The British Olympic Association was one of the first to decide, and they voted overwhelmingly to go to Moscow.
Now, only the opening ceremony was left, the next deadline. But with 65 nations boycotting, it wasn't enough to stop the Olympics or persuade the IOC, but it also wasn't enough for them to be normal. What was left, what remained, was a competition that was broken.
Of the games of the 22nd Olympiad.
I'm a bit befuddled of what to make of all of this. I'll be honest, I try to play all these videos down the middle. It is hard for me to get in the headspace of the pro-boycott crowd. I mean, I've seen the political cartoons, but I also live in a country that just got out of a 20-year adventure in Afghanistan, so the idea of that same country boycotting the USSR for doing the same thing before I was born, it's just a lot to wrap my head around. And yeah, the only takeaway I kind of have is like, these mean politicians are just pushing around the sports people. Like, that's my one...
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the one thing I keep coming back to is this argument that you see once in a while where, in the case of athletes being political, right? It's like, shut up and dribble, right? Like, stay out of politics. We started Search Party a year ago, so we've done a number of videos, and it's almost all of them come back to this idea that, like, you don't separate, like, sports are politics and politics are sports. Like, they use each other and the outcome is very different all the time, but they are inseparable.
You are characterized accurately as clean and decent and honest and dedicated. That's why it's particularly important that you join in with us.
They manipulate lives, they play with lives that they have no real right to, and then they don't do the right thing. What's new?
I mean, how did this recipe start? Just to be very brass tacks about it.
Well, there's a woman, Miji Rioch, who's also a Bicycling Hall of Fame person, but she's passed away quite a while ago, and she's from Philadelphia. And I like to cook, and I told her, and so she gave me her family's recipe for making cheesecake. And, in honor of her, I put it in the book with a few modifications of my own. But like I said, cutting the sugar in half, it was just too sweet for me. And, it's really in honor of Miji. I probably should have called it Miji's recipe. But she's a very, very nice person and very talented cyclist. And if they'd had women's cycling in the Olympics back then, she would have been in the Olympics. She was that good.
and welcome to another face-slashing and multiverse-clashing episode of What Happened, the investigative YouTube-style pop culture media show that's covering a 15-year-old superhero film for absolutely no reason at all. Anyway, the current slate of soup cinema is in a very precarious position. Some things have pulled in good numbers and audience approval, while others simply have not. And really, this isn't too different from how things were back in the late 2000s. For every success, there was a commercial or critical not a success. An excellent example of the latter is our subject today, which focused on the origin story of everyone's favorite cigar-chomping, claw-popping, gene-lusting knucklehead, James Logan Howlett. An origin story whose critical backlash caused a chain of events that inexplicably are still being felt in 2024. So grab your best flannel shirt or yellow spandex as I answer the question, what happened to X-Men Origins Wolverine?
Today we're going to create Weapon X.
Obviously, the success of the X-Men films produced at 20th Century Fox emboldened the company to start theorizing how to squeeze even more blood out of the proverbial mutant stone. And of course, it was logical to start with the franchise's most popular hero. I mean, hell, kids were screaming at their parents to buy action figures of the scruffy little guy before the stores sold out. But while traditionally being just a member of a larger team, the plots of the first three X-Men films revolved heavily around Wolverine, which was absolutely 100% grade A authentic the style at the time. So the idea of Logan unquestionably being the central star wasn't too weird or risky, like, I don't know, greenlighting X-Men Origins Toad or something. However, even before X2 had released, a writer by the name of David I Helped Ruin Game of Thrones Benioff had tried convincing Fox execs to let him take a crack at writing a standalone Wolverine feature film, but it took until 2004 before he eventually got the job. Now, even though we're all aware of the final product's shortcomings, Benioff's original pitch was supposed to be a gritty, brutal take on the character, taking a lot of inspiration from Frank Miller's limited series, as well as Barry Windsor Smith's classic Weapon X storyline. As a sort of soft confirmation on this, in a 2004 interview with the website, that logo's a blast from the past, Benioff was asked if he could reveal anything about the story, to which he responded, "I'm not allowed to talk about it. Fox is pretty careful about that. It's not even totally finalized what story we are doing. What I can say is that in the X-Men movies, we've seen a lot of the sweet Wolverine, so I think it's time to mess him up a little bit because all the fans know that he's the best there is at what he does, but what he does isn't very nice. Also, getting to write sick in a comic book is the coolest thing." Of course, we didn't really get anything approaching even that vague description. Like so many movie-based What Happened stories I've covered before, the powers that be didn't approve of the first draft. Hugh Jackman reportedly collaborated on this initial draft with Benioff, as it was supposed to be more of a personal character study, but evidently, that's not what Fox were looking for. These dueling desires over the script lasted for a few more years, and in the meantime, Jackman fulfilled his contract obligations by starring in that other X-Men movie, you know, the one that came after X2? I can't remember the name of it.
I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
Right, yeah, that one. Big ups to My Way Entertainment, by the way.
I'm the Juggernaut, bitch! I'm gonna hit you with your own pimp!
So, when that film finished up being a critical disaster, Fox turned their attention back to Wolverine and hired another writer, Skip Woods, whose career at the time was absolutely room temperature, having just written Live Free or Die Hard and the Hitman movie, to rewrite Benioff's first draft. After that, David Suicide Squad Ayer was then brought in to contribute, and by the time the script was finally in a spot that Fox execs started liking, the 2008 writer's strike was looming, so they did the most logical thing. Hired 2 more writers to try and make further last-minute changes before the strike started in earnest, which they apparently weren't able to do to everyone's 100% satisfaction. The first of these writers was James Vanderbilt, whose writing career has been full of peaks and valleys, having helped write The Rundown, Zodiac, The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, the last two Scream movies, and the Independence Day sequel nobody saw. The other writer, Scott Silver, may not be as prolific, but has certainly made an impact in Hollywood, having worked on the scripts for 8 Mile, The Fighter, 2019's Joker, and the upcoming Joker, pretentious subtitle. Now, what do you think you get when you've hired, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 writers who have all worked on vastly different films with contrasting tones and themes, and force them to quickly finish things up before a strike? Well, you get X-Men Origins Wolverine. Even though 20th Century Fox had thrown a small army of writers at it, Wolverine's script was still a little spotty, and now barely resembled the somber personal origin story both Benioff and Jackman had originally wanted. One of, if not the most major change Fox had instituted and was confirmed by multiple sources, was the desire for this spin-off to then spawn more spin-offs, which meant multiple New Mutants would need to appear. The biggest of these was, of course, Gambit and Deadpool, whose own solo films were already being soft-planned by Fox, since their mutant status would mean they would fall under their deal with Marvel. In fact, Ryan Reynolds had teamed up with the writer of the Blade films, David S. Goyer, to start coming up with ideas for a Deadpool film back in 2003 under New Line Cinema. But once it was clear that the X-Men IP was staying at Fox, those plans were abandoned.
Great.
They instead started to focus on Blade Trinity while trying to lay down the groundwork for a potential Night Stalkers spin-off, which I don't know about you, but I'm still waiting for. It was David Benioff's task to incorporate Deadpool specifically, and in an old archived interview from Total Film, Jackman is quoted as saying the following, which has both aged well and rather poorly. I have to be very careful how I talk about Deadpool because it's something I'm really excited about in the movie, where it plays and how it plays. I just can't think right now how I can tell you about it without giving away some really cool ideas. That's where David Benioff was really smart, how coolly he brought the character in. The things I'm thinking about now, I don't want to tell you because the fans will go, "Aw, that's cool." Actually, some fans might be pissed off, but that's okay. I think they'll understand why we did it. We took some creative licenses with them. Oh, he was not wrong about that. Anyway, with the strike still ongoing at the start of 2008, Fox didn't want to wait, so they started searching for a director so they could get the cameras rolling. Potential candidates that already had experience with the X-Men, people such as Bryan Singer and Brett Ratner, as well as the Underworld and Live Free or Die Hard helmer Len Wiseman, expressed interest in the project. Hell, even Zack Snyder was approached to fill in the director's chair, but turned it down as he was preoccupied with Watchmen. Who Fox eventually went with was somewhat of a dark horse. Gavin Hood had made a pretty significant name for himself with Sotsi, a co-production between the UK and South Africa that won the Academy Award in 2005 for Best International Film. He followed that up with his first major studio production, the political thriller Rendition, and he came away from that experience pretty positively, as by his own admission, New Line Cinema trusted him without constant oversight. That wasn't the case with Wolverine, though. With a reported $150 million price tag, pressure from the writer's strike, and the hope this would launch the solo careers of other mutants, trouble began brewing almost immediately. As soon as filming kicked off in January of 2008, reports started filtering from the set and onto news sites saying Gavin Hood and Fox producers were posturing, snarling, and butting heads, much like Logan and his classic antagonist Victor Creed. So, between March and August of that year, you couldn't browse a movie set without hearing how Wolverine was struggling to get filmed due to the constant issues between Hood and Fox. The following comes from FirstShowing.net, who relayed a report that originally emanated from Hollywood elsewhere. Apparently, we've got another case of a studio exec, Fox's Tom Rothman, trying to change a character to fit the widest possible audience, when the director, Gavin Hood, who knows what he's doing, has been shooting something they don't like. The story, as posted on Hollywood Elsewhere, discusses a huge set being used recently that, according to their source, was supposed to be on the dark, dingy, and somber side. This was Gavin Hood's choice as the director for the look of the set. But then Fox's Tom Rothman ordered them to repaint it, and Hood came back to find that it had been repainted top to bottom on Rothman's orders. This suggests that a creative tug-of-war is going on, and that Rothman, one can reasonably gather, feels a certain managerial/territorial investment in the X-Men franchise. And that's just one of the reports, so yeah, a tale as old as time. A director trying to create a specific vision that's true to the source material, while an executive wants to make changes they feel will make the film the most profitable it can be.
So I'm watching this wing come together, and it's like how the
well, that's a common occurrence in a lot of big movie sets. What is far less common is not having writers available to help tweak scenes or smooth out dialogue. For the first full month and a half of filming, the crew were still working with an unfinished script, and it was only until mid-February, when the writer's strike was over, that Fox ordered rewrites of specific scenes, so new pages were now being added almost daily, causing more delays and frustrations for the actors and director. One of these changes that frustrated Gavin Hood specifically was the fact that Fox wanted to greatly tone down any scenes where Wolverine was supposed to be grappling with grief, guilt, and PTSD, and probably replace those scenes with ones where Wolverine doesn't look at explosions. Unfortunately, these wouldn't be the only villainous forces X-Men Origins would have to contend with, as ongoing arguments, possible director replacement schemes, and the film being leaked online were still about to bear their claws. Hood and Fox's bickering became so intense over the course of 2008 that the studio decided to initiate backup plans in case they needed to break glass and boot Hood from the project. According to an article on Variety, this plan to possibly replace Hood was going to be extremely sneaky. Wolverine helmer Gavin Hood was nearly fired, according to sources, because of squabbles with the studio, and two backup directors were in place before Richard Donner, who is married to the film's producer Lauren Schuler Donner, flew to the Australian set to smooth things over. At the time, Fox insisted that Richard Donner was on set because he is a producer on the film. However, current credits for the film list various producers, but Donner is not one of them. Now, this is just speculation on my behalf, but it seems this might have been part of a two-pronged plan. If the late Richard Donner had not been able to quell tensions and Hood was sent packing or quit, they would then insert those backup directors, or Donner himself would simply step in to finish the film, or at the very least would help find someone who could. Cooler heads prevailed, though, and Gavin Hood stayed on until the end of production. Although really, at what cost? X-Men Origins Wolverine had suffered bad press all throughout 2008, with Jackman's smiling assurances during that year's Comic-Con not doing all that much to instill confidence. And what confidence there was absolutely annihilated a short time later. In March of 2009, 2 months ahead of Wolverine's May release date, a full-length DVD-quality work print of the film was spread across the internet, uploaded by a single individual who had reportedly bought the work print from a local merchant in New York City. Even though Fox got it scrubbed from most sites in the first 24 hours, the damage was done and had already been downloaded millions of times, at least 4.5 by Fox's count at the time.
That leak had a higher Rotten Tomatoes score, which was shocking, given that it was, blue screens and ropes and...
A hilarious side note to this, though, a movie blogger who worked for Fox News wrote a full review of the leaked work print, talked shit about how easy it was to download, and of course, parted ways with Fox shortly thereafter. Like, bro, what the hell were you thinking?
I'm trying to get fired.
So, with all that said, it should be no surprise that with all the studio interference, the contrasting writing styles, the last-minute revisions, bad early word of mouth from the work print, and everything else that no amount of healing factor was going to repair the damage from the critical thrashing X-Men Origins Wolverine suffered. It still proudly stands as the second lowest rated X-Men film of all time, right behind the unwatchable dreck that is Dark Phoenix. Man, I should take a crack at that one someday. Commercially, though, X-Men Origins did make $375 million on a budget of $150, which is pretty typical for a successful superhero film at that time, but trailed far, far behind the likes of The Dark Knight or the first Iron Man. It was enough, of course, to still greenlight a sequel, the marginally better The Wolverine, and at least that wound up giving us the brilliant Logan, which seemed like the tone that Benioff, Jackman, and Hood originally wanted. Speaking of, Hood doesn't look back on his first and only foray into superhero cinema as negatively as you'd think, saying to a crowd before a screening of one of his later films, "I'm very grateful because I managed to buy a house off that film, so don't get me wrong. I own the mistakes I made. I learned a great deal." So, while X-Men Origins Wolverine fared well enough to get its own sequels, most of the spin-offs Fox execs were wanking off to were never developed. There was supposed to be X-Men Origins Magneto, a Gambit solo film that was really close to being made, an X-Force spin-off, and of course a Ryan Reynolds-led Deadpool project. And all were either cancelled, never even started, or heavily retooled. For example, it took a further 5 years and Ryan Reynolds' famous test footage before Fox finally took the Merc with the Mouse seriously and allowed a weird, violent X-Men film to be made and, actually be accurate to the character. It remains to be seen if Deadpool and Wolverine will give the superhero genre the shot in the arm it desperately needs. I'm writing this weeks in advance, of course, but it can't be any worse than the last time these two characters shared the screen, which of course gave us this Slenderman Baraka nightmare that I wish we could all remove from our collective consciousness. If you know of any other monstrously moronic, mutant-based misfires, let me know in the comments below or enter the danger room that is my social media. See you next time, bub, and thanks for watching!
Get in there. Okay, one wing. Oh, my neck.
Edward Quinto. Awesome.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I've got a Gundam wing, but not Gundam wing, not the wing Gundam, just a Gundam's wing. I'm funny. Let me video this actually. It's hard to do one-handed. Oh no, it's only this bit. G13.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my freaking god!
Well, guys, I feel like a young man again. Despite entering my elderly years, sitting at the ripe old age of 22, today's video has made me feel like a spring chicken once more. It's a great feeling. Now, you youngins might not remember this, but back in the late 2010s, commentary YouTube used to look a little bit different. I feel like the things people used to talk about were equally as controversial as they are today, but it was a different kind of controversial. It's not like today where it feels like every other week we're talking about a new YouTuber who's a giant weirdo. It was just people doing absolutely batshit insane stuff for YouTube, which is exactly the kind of video we're talking about today. A few months ago, a YouTuber decided that it would be a good idea to derail a train for a YouTube video. This pretty much flew under the radar, however, until this week when the guy was charged with 2 different felonies for, you know, derailing a train for YouTube. The original video is titled "Loaded BNSF Arbor Collides and Derails in Bennett, Nebraska. Most insane video I've ever taken." Now, in this video, this guy details this situation that went down in Nebraska, where a defective coal car had to be left behind and it got parked on a section of track that another train was headed towards. Apparently, the switch to divert that train away from that section of track where that coal car was parked was not flipped, and that caused the train to go down the wrong section of track and collide with this coal car. I do not know a whole lot about trains, so hopefully the way I explain that makes sense and is relatively correct. What's important, however, is that this guy is filming this and presenting it as an accident. He's saying that some crew member forgot to flip the switch, and that it's just this freak accident that this train was sent down the wrong section of track and collided with this coal car. However, what's actually come out is that this guy flipped the switch to send this train down that section of track, and he's the one that caused all of this to happen, for no other reason than trying to get a video to go viral on YouTube, which, I mean, he did succeed at. The video is currently sitting at like 500,000 views, but at the cost of landing himself 2 felony charges that could put him in prison for almost as long as he has been alive. This guy is 17 years old, and he is currently facing up to 14 years in prison for doing this dumbass shit. It's not looking too good for this guy, but we'll get more into that later. For now, let's just watch the video. Let's begin. Please subscribe. So that is genuinely how the video starts. This guy is filming an attempted murder, and he's editing it like a 2016 YouTube prank gone wrong video. This is insane.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. I would like to take the time to set the stage for the fateful incident that we will be discussing today. On Sunday, April 21st, just after 7 p.m., a empty Arbor coal train was heading back from the Nebraska City power plant. As it passed through Bennett, it had a defective coal car that it needed to be taken out of the train. The crew decides to place it in the rip track just inside of Bennett, going across the main road between the grain elevator, and the main railroad crossing. The crew did this and set a switch in a manner that they can park the car, set up a portable derailleur, and then continue their journey. Unbeknownst to them, they completely neglected to reset the switch to its original position.
Okay, so as we know now, this is complete bullshit. There is video surveillance of this guy flipping the switch. So not only was this guy willing to jeopardize the lives of everybody on this train and anybody around this train, he was also willing to ruin the lives of the crew that had to leave this coal car behind. I'm a big believer in second chances, and we'll talk about this more later, but regardless of age, this guy belongs in prison.
On the evening of Monday the 22nd, just after 5 p.m., as I was driving home from work along Highway 2, there was a loaded arbor that I spotted. The train came into Bennett just after 6 p.m. Unbeknownst to the crew of the loaded arbor coal train, the switch was still set incorrectly. Meanwhile, the park defective coal car remained stationary on its correct track as the loaded arbor speeds along its route. It hurls towards the coal car, and with a deafening crash, the two trains collide, sending shock waves through the tranquil town. Despite the chaos, miraculously, the crew emerges from the collision completely unharmed, though undoubtedly shaken by the ordeal. The aftermath of the collision raises the questions of how such a routine journey can turn perilous and what lessons can be gleaned from such a brush disaster. Now, with all that good stuff out of the way, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's video.
Okay, so maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic here, but there's something very unsettling to me about this video. I mean, this guy's out here doing supervillain shit, making trains derail for fun, putting people's lives in harm's way for YouTube content in a way that we really haven't seen that often, and he's just sitting here scripting out dramatic, dorky dialogue to talk about this happening. I mean, the whole sending shockwaves to a small, quaint town, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's video. I mean, what? This is very, very weird behavior. This seems like something this guy was planning for a while.
Freaking God! Oh my God, are they okay?
Dude, no offense, but I feel like it's probably for the best that you tried to take up being a real-life supervillain instead of going into acting. This is not a very convincing performance. But yeah, this is what this guy caused. This guy has videos train spotting that date back 4 years. It's obviously something he has a pretty big interest in, so there's no way he did not know what was gonna happen here. This could have ended in catastrophe. It's a miracle nobody died from this. This guy had to have known that was a very real possibility, and he still had no issue doing this for a YouTube video. What the fuck is wrong with people, man?
Okay, so this arbor just hit a defective car, apparently, and is now on the ground. Badly. Here. Switch was thrown wrong. It looks like they hit a derail or something. And then just plowed right in.
Now that's basically where the video ends, and guys, there is just something weird about this. I can't quite put my finger on it, but just the complete disregard for the safety of the people on this train or anybody around this train when it happened. It's very disturbing. And then to walk around the train saying, "Oh my God, this is so insane, what could have happened," while knowing you caused this. There's something weird about this. Like, part of me wants to say this was not specifically for a YouTube video. This seems like something a lot deeper. This looks more like some weird dream this kid had where he wanted to derail a train or see it happen in person. This is strange. Back to what I was saying about second chances earlier though, I feel like a lot of people take way too long to figure out that your life is your one shot at things. Like, you get one go, you get one chance, and if you fuck it up badly enough, you're done. You don't get to reset, you have ruined your one chance. And I feel like a big mistake can really help people learn that, and sometimes times, that's all they needed. They needed to learn that, and then if they're given a second chance, they're a completely different person. This is different. I'm surprised this guy is only looking at 14 years. I'm pretty shocked this is not being looked at as attempted murder. This is not some silly mistake. This guy planned this out. He knew exactly what he was doing. This guy needs to pay the price. I feel bad for his family. I mean, this guy's young, but a slap on the wrist for doing something like this would be an insane injustice. Well, guys, what are your thoughts? What do you think is an appropriate punishment for somebody doing something like this for a YouTube video? Or somebody just doing something like this in general? I really don't know how relevant it is that this was done, quote, for a YouTube video. I mean, I don't know if that really makes it worse than doing it for any other reason. I mean, if you had to pick what is worse, derailing a train for content or derailing a train for fun, how are you making that decision? Personally, I do not know. That is a problem for the courts, not me. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and walk on over to that subscribe button and touch it. It's free. It won't cost you anything. But for now, that's all I have for you today. Bye.
Okay, that's the correct way. Yeah, so that pivot's okay. That was not a very good video. Alright, let's get these bits out. What else can I watch? Sure.
Walt Disney World's MGM Studios Park opened in 1989 to some mixed reviews. A fascinating look behind the scenes of the newest movie studio in Central Florida, yet it was ultimately deemed a half-day experience by most guests. It's because of this that Disney was looking to add to its lineup of attractions, with headlining rides like Tower of Terror and Rock and Roller Coaster solidifying their e-ticket status in the late 90s. Disney was looking to balance out their thrills with a brand new interactive show. One that was a guaranteed hit that would surely last more than a few years, or so they hoped. Today, we discuss the history of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Play It. Following a 40-year partnership between the Walt Disney Company and ABC, the American Broadcasting Company, on July 31st of 1995, the two companies announced a $19 billion merger. Among countless radio and local television stations, the big entities that were acquired were the cable juggernauts, ABC, ESPN, the History Channel, A&E Network, and Lifetime Television. It's at this time that ABC would begin ramping up their promotion of the Disney parks, with holiday specials, live concert series, and so many iconic ABC sitcom families making their way down to Orlando. Of course, this promotion went both ways, as Disney would begin promoting the ABC programming at their parks on billboards and in practical product placement. Yay, synergy! In search of more ways to help cross-promote the brands, in 2001, Disney looked to introduce a theme park version of what at the time was America's #1 hot new game show.
From the four corners of the continent, we have flown them to New York City. People just like you, who called our phone number dreaming of instant riches. Will one of them seize this day, have the knowledge and the courage to change the course of their lives in one short evening? Starting tonight and every night for the next 2 weeks, join us from New York City as we play Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was a popular game show that debuted on ABC in August of 1999 and saw almost instant success. Originally hosted by TV personality Regis Philbin, the show featured a quiz competition with contestants attempting to win a top prize of $1 million. Contestants must answer a series of multiple choice questions of increasing difficulty and increasing prize money. With each question, guests have an option to go home with their earnings from the previous round or risk it all with the goal to reach that $1 million grand prize. The show itself was one of the first at the time to bring drama to the game show format. While other popular game shows of the past, like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, maintained the traditional game show feel, a studio audience that was facing a stage where contestants would look at a massive television board to solve a problem while the host would robotically ask questions, or be there to simply repeat what the contestant just said. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire took the game show format and turned it on its head. The host and contestants would sit at chairs across from one another, while the audience sat in a theater in the round type setup. Both the contestant and host would have angled screens in front of them where each round of questions would be displayed, while the viewers at home would see the same thing that they saw on their monitor just at the bottom of their television screen. Dramatic spotlights would highlight the two, as each increasingly difficult question would be accompanied by increasingly dramatic lighting and sound cues. Oh, and that theme song still gets me hyped to this day.
I realize what I'm doing right now is off screen. I apologize.
To add to the drama, the show provided some relief or assistance to contestants as they were given 3 lifelines in case they were stumped by a question. The first, 50-50, saw 2 incorrect answers eliminated, leaving the contestant with a choice between the correct answer and 1 remaining wrong answer. Next, Ask the Audience. Audience members would use 4-button keypads attached to their seat to vote for the answer they believed to be correct. The result of that poll would then be presented to the contestants to hopefully help aid them in answering their question. And lastly, Phone a Friend, where the contestant could call any person of their choosing and was given 30 seconds to discuss the question with that person. These lifelines not only helped the contestants reach their ultimate goal of $1 million, but also added variety to the otherwise formulaic question-answer format. This paired with a host with a background in talk shows that would help sort of guide contestants on certain decisions while at the same time acknowledging the pressure of the situation and obviously keeping things on track.
Final answer. It's Nirvana for $32,000.
During its first year on the air, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was the #1 ranked show on cable television, with an average of 53.2 million viewers across 3 nights a week, which was its standard schedule. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire beat out every popular sitcom, talk show, and sports show at the time. To give you a better picture, Friends, which was airing its 6th season and was probably at its peak popularity, ran the same night as Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and boasted a 14.0 rating, while just 1 hour later, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire would hit 17.5 million viewers on an average Thursday night. To say this game show was a hit would be a massive understatement. Following the success was a full rollout of products, ad campaigns, sweepstakes, you name it.
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Ray does.
Showtime.
Now you can play the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire game at McDonald's. Answer correctly and you could win cash on every card, up to $1 million.
Who wants to be a millionaire at McDonald's?
Ray does.
Due to McDonald's working relationship with the Walt Disney Company with promotional tie-ins for nearly every movie release in the late 90s and early 2000s, McDonald's just had to get their fair share of the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire fever. But in case pulling stickers off of a box of fries wasn't enough, fans would soon be able to get their hands on a handheld version of the game show.
I do.
Is that your final answer?
It's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the handheld game, with the voice of Regis Philbin.
And your answer is?
It's a boy.
Is that your final answer?
With hundreds of questions and 3 lifelines. Hold the audience, 50-50, or phone a friend.
Is that your final answer?
It's $1 million worth of fun for everyone. Electronic Who Wants to Be a Millionaire handheld game and the new Who Wants to Be a Millionaire tabletop game coming soon.
There was also multiple CD-ROM versions of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, one of which I actually played a few times as a child, but sadly never won. Seeing that this phenomenon wasn't slowing down anytime soon, ABC and Disney were looking for ways to implement the show into the parks. At the same time, in 1999, the Walt Disney Company was in the process of planning out a new park in Disney's California Adventure, as well as a much-needed refresh to their MGM Studios park in Florida. But where would this fit in at MGM Studios? Well, to answer that, I took a trip to the modern-day Hollywood studios to find out. Early MGM Studios is by far my favorite era of any theme park. Although it had its issues, its lineup of rides paired with its faux studio atmosphere, nothing beats it for me. Right now I'm making my way towards what used to be the old backlot / soundstage area of the park. The tram tour ended with a walkthrough of multiple sound stages showcasing the different aspects of film and television production. Behind me sits Toy Story Midway Mania, which opened in May of 2008, but before that was home to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Play It. Previously, this soundstage was host to multiple television tapings and special events. Everything from Ernest Saves Christmas to Thunder in Paradise, WCW Saturday Night, and the all-new Mickey Mouse Club, a television show that would air from 1989 to 1994 and produce future stars like Justin Timberlake, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Ryan Gosling, all of which got their start in these sound stages at MGM Studios. At the time, this was one of the few locations at MGM Studios that was consistently acting as a full-time studio space. But as the new millennium rolled around and the novelty of an active production studio wore off, what was pitched but inevitably didn't end up happening was a permanent filming location for the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire game show, as it was headed towards syndication. A near-perfect replica of the set from the ABC studios in New York was constructed in the sound stages at MGM Studios. And just in time for the tail end of spring break of 2001, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Play It was born.
Then, put on your thinking cap and warm up your fastest fingers as you play along at Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Play It. In this attraction, every answer counts, and you could end up in the hot seat.
Final answer.
At the same time on the West Coast, construction had been underway of the soundstage that would host the attraction at Disney's California Adventure, a park that at the time had a pretty rough start and was looking for anything to help dig up some type of guest intrigue in a park that was considered a whole lot of filler. But because there wasn't any open space that was readily available, a new soundstage was constructed in the Hollywood Pictures backlot area of the park, right next to a little ride called Superstar Limo. This version of the attraction would once again be a replica of the set from the television show and follow the same format as the show as well. Well, mostly the same format, as it was missing one crucial aspect.
So there's the wings. Then I built the backpack. After this, I still have to deal with the whip, but yeah, I'm getting there. Oh, my neck. I'll put this here. I don't need this right now.
Same format, as it was missing one crucial aspect. See, here's the problem with the game show called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire existing at a theme park. Most park goers want to be a millionaire.
And if they're aware of what the show is, they're gonna be expecting a shot.
Obviously, a theme park cannot be expected to shell out an exorbitant amount of money like that daily, especially if that park is owned by a company who was going through one of their worst periods financially at the time. And yes, I do believe guests would be a little silly to believe that they could win $1 million during a trivia game on vacation. But Disney's solution might not have been the best idea. Before we get to that, we must determine how you would even become eligible to step into that hot seat. Theme park guests who were looking to try their shot at the show would need to attend one of these shows as an audience member. Once seated with the show about to start, a fastest finger question would be asked, and each audience member had a chance to answer on a keypad attached to their seat. The audience member who answered that question both correctly and the fastest would get a shot
Thanks
in
for
the
stopping
hot
by.
seat.
Have a good night.
There was
I'll show you
also
the
no
pictures
age
in the morning.
requirement for the show, although the fastest finger question did.
Edward Quinto. Good work on your build, sir.
Thank you much. Like I said, I'll show you
Edward
pictures.
Quinto. Good night.
Like I said, I'll show you pictures in the morning. Until then, you have a great night. Page 10.
Narrow down the selection to mostly adults because the question needed to be answered correctly, not just the fastest. But don't worry, if you didn't make it to the hot seat, you could still use the keypad attached to your seat to answer these same questions the contestant was being asked for the chance at some prizes.
So let's get to that. Money was not involved, but the scoring system was roughly the same.
If the correct answer to a question in the real life show would get you $100, during the Disney Parks version, you would receive 100 points, so on and so forth. So what, do these points convert to Disney gift cards? Unfortunately, no. They converted to pins with correlating point value printed on them. So if you got 100 points, you got a pin that looked like this. Yeah, kinda lame. Fun fact, one of the most common places you could still find some of these point-related pins is during pin trading around the parks.
One other reason why I'm here at Hollywood Studios today is because I'm doing a little bit of pin trading, trying to see if I could find one of these Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It pins. And of course I had to bring a pin expert because I am not one. That's why Mackenzie is here. Say hello.
Hello, how are you?
How often have you seen one of these pins before?
I would say I see them pretty frequently. That's why I definitely brought you here, especially on. Oh, should I say the days that I come here?
No, you should not. No. I have a question for you. Have you ever seen a pin that looks like this? This is from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It. This is the attraction that used to be here in the same building as Toy Story Midway Mania. That's the only reason I bring it up.
I can't say I've ever seen one.
One thing I wish I knew before today is how meticulous the pin trading process, especially if you're looking for one particular pin. We literally scoured this entire park to try to find this one stupid little pin from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It. I think we checked a total of maybe close to 10 different pin boards, multiple different cast members asking everywhere, and it took us till the very, very last stop over in the Tatooine Traders by Star Tours until we actually found somebody who's seen the pin, period. We asked multiple different cast members. None of them knew what I was talking about whatsoever. But one cast member, Becca from Pennsylvania, had actually seen the pin earlier in that day on either another cast member's lanyard or a pin board they had somewhere backstage. And guess what? We got it. We traded for it. We got the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It 100 pin. And I can't believe, I cannot believe that we found this. After an hour of deliberation, we finally found the pin.
I wasn't even nervous, not even 1 second. I knew this pin had to be somewhere. I knew I wasn't crazy. They had me in the first half, but Becca pulled it through.
Behind the Zaku 3. Okay. Go for it. I need to get me a Zaku. I need to get me Char's Zaku. Debating on a high grade or waiting to see if they put out a Real Grade 2.0, because the Real Grade 1.0 high grade, Real Grade 1.0 Zaku 2 mold is considered one of the worst from what I've seen. So I don't want to mess with that. So a bit more Real Grades, but Anyway. Little tiny piece here. These are the thrusters.
Irayamu Guillermo. I can't go higher than an HG. Anything bigger doesn't fit in my cabinet.
Real grades are the same size as high grades, just more complex. There's still 1/144th. This is a real grade kit that I'm building now. Where is this? In there? Oh, okay.
Irayamu Guillermo. Oh really? I always thought RGS were bigger than HGS.
Nope. Real grade and high grade are the same scale, and entry grade, high grade, and real grade are all 1/144th. Master grade is 1/100th. Perfect grade is 1/60th, and there's a couple that are 1/40th or something like that. But those are rare. And at that point, they're not complex anymore. They're very simple. Yep, popped out. Yeah. Here is again the real grade Epyon that I'm building. You know, it is yay big. I don't have anything to compare it with, but it's about 6-7 inches, I think. Here's the Wing Zero. As you can see, physically it is tiny. The Master Grade, I'm pretty sure, is like that big. I've seen it. Real Grade is small. A small boy.
Irayamu Guillermo. 1/40th. That thing's gotta be pushing 10 feet tall.
Not quite. That'd be 1/4. One-40th kits are, I think, they're like 1.5 to 2 feet tall. But so they are. Oh, that's the mega-sized model. That's what they are. The mega-sized models. So they are structurally simple. Maybe high grade or even less difficult. Complexity, because they have to hold up a lot of weight. They're very much display pieces. I don't own any, I just know about them. Okay. So slide this into the back. Oh shit, I'm missing an... What's that missing? I just noticed Epyon's missing one of his... Okay. Whew! I'm gonna glue that in. Didn't think I had to glue that in, but I do. Okay. Anyway, backpack is secured. Then let's attach the backpack cover. That's F25. Yeah, real grade is master grade complexity at high grade scale, basically.
Irayamu Guillermo. Alright, so RX-78-2 is about 60 feet tall and 1/40th of that is basically 2 feet, so yeah. I feel dumb for saying for 10 feet.
That's fine.
XD.
It's fine. Y'all make mistakes. Brain no work good. Brain no worky good. Okay. Thrusters all the way up. And clip that on the back. That's not sanded down enough. Does that lock it on somehow? Interesting. Okay, that there. We have an Epyon. That's a very imposing wingspan. So it does that. I think that's meant for the transformation mode, but who's counting? Him big. Well, he's not big, but he's got a presence, I guess. What I would say.
Irayamu Guillermo. I started out with the no grades. I had NGS of the Wing Gundams Epyon and Tall Geese.
Yeah, I started building Gundam about a year ago. Actually, the Wing Zero was my first there. I mixed up high grade and master grade. Then, of course, the high grade that I got was the RX-78 1.5, which was a very simple kit. So anyway, I built the real grade Wing Zero. I was like, wow, this is really complex. And I built the master grade Grandpa 1.5. I was like, this is not complex at all. What the hell? I thought it would be harder. And then I learned it was that Bandai reprints old kits. And that kit was 20 years old. Okay. Balance is a little bit of an issue here. The backpack is heavy. Let me adjust the lighting a little bit. And here it is, next to Wing Zero. Unfold your wings, Wing Zero.
Irayamu Guillermo. It all started with a what the hell in the imports section of a Toys R Us in 2017. I bought a mini RX-78 NT Alex and here I am 6 years later.
Starts with 1. Alright, there's the 2 wing boys. Yep, I should probably be in frame, shouldn't I? Like I said, I chose Epyon for my second real grade for a couple reasons. One, I needed a rifle for Wing 0, and also it looks fucking cool as shit. I haven't actually gotten around to watching the series yet. I will sooner or later. I need to finish G. Alright, let's make some weapons. Also, my history, my interaction with Gunpla is interesting. I built a couple of Zoid models back in the day. I don't think I have them nearby. Like I built the Liger Zero way back when Zoids was hot in 2002 or so. I got a couple others of those, but not many. Oh, here's that wire bit comes in. Anyway, so I built the Liger Zero, and that was a learning experience. I built some of those small cube-based Zoids from the Fusors line. Didn't actually watch the show. This is F1. Oh, missed a piece. F1.6, F2.6. Anyway, let me finish my story. I built the Liger Zero. I got a couple of those cube-based Zoids. Then that was it for a while. Didn't do any kind of modeling. I was aware of the hobby, but never really got into it. Then I heard about Super Mini Pla. I was aware of it through the grapevine. A friend, I got the I got Voltron, Super Mini Pla Voltron. I got in 2018 at an anime convention, and built that one line per night for over the course of 5 nights. It was fun. Didn't build anything again for a while, but it was like, okay, I could get used to this. Got the Shogun Megazord, Miteki Shogun, for Christmas of 2019 by request, and from there I was pretty much hooked. I followed that up with a purchase of fairly soon after I bought imported. I knew that the Go-Go 5 stuff was coming out, so I pre-ordered that. Pre-ordered Victory Robo Grand Liner. Then I bought Don Kuga and SSSS Gridman, imported those, and then COVID hit. I bought before that, a friend of mine convinced me to buy their kit of the Sandrock custom in this Waltz version that they'd had kicking around. I bought that for like $5 or something. Built that, had no attachment to it. It's not in good shape these days. I just use it. It looks terrible. I have to use it for paint practice. It's got broken parts, multicolored parts. Like I said, it's just used for paint practice and whatnot. Paint testing rather. So I don't count that as technically it's my first Gunpla, but I don't really count it. But after that, like I said, I got big into Super Mini Pla, and and regular mini plot. About the Cure Major line, most of it in 2020. The white int goes there. Got all the Cure Major stuff as was coming out, and went back and bought some older stuff. I bought the Lupin Ranger vs. Pat Ranger stuff, some of it. Did I buy anything older? Don't think I stepped into Q Ranger till later, so that would have been the oldest I got. I mean, I don't know. From there, I just kicked off. I got a lot, basically. No point going into it. I just got a bunch of stuff. I got full-time into the hobby. Stuck with SMP for a while, Mini-Pla and Super Mini-Pla. Until like last year, well, I wanted to build a, let's see, what did I buy? What did I do to branch out? I got a couple of the Flame Toys kits. That was at the same time as I got the Gundam, wasn't it? Basically, what happened, I'd started to be interested, like, I saw the Digimon stuff that Figurized Janda was doing, like, I should get into that. And then I was at Hobby Lobby, and they had a bunch of, they having their, 40% off model kit sales. Like, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I might as well do this. It's the most obvious next step in the model building hobby. So I got some Gundams. So I got the Wing Zero that is just off camera here, Real Grade Wing Zero, and I got the Master Grade RG RX-78. Don't cut those, okay. And had fun with those. I also got around the same time. Got the Figurized amplified Machine Dramon. That was fun. And I just haven't looked back from there. So how's this supposed to go? So I branched out into like the Flame Toys kits and all kind of stuff. Gunpla, Flame Toys, various and sundry things. Like I said, I'm building, Zoids too. I've only built 2 Zoids so far, the Blade Liger and the Genobreaker there. There's a couple more I want, but Zoids, I don't know. I only want some of the iconic big Zoids, and those are, of course, very expensive. So it's tricky. Tricky road to wander. I keep putting this as E. This is F, G, H. Oh, okay. F132. I'm rambling at this point. I apologize. Thanks. I just started buying Gunpla. I went a little hog wild with Gunpla at first. I'm trying to moderate myself now. But I bought a whole bunch of the Witch from Mercury kits because they were, fun and inexpensive. And like the fact that they're inexpensive is dangerous. Just means they're easy to justify buying a few. And then all of a sudden, I've got to find space for them. So I'm trying to balance that out. There is so much in the hobby of Gundam that I could do, so I just gotta find a balance. this is not coming off. Okay, that goes there. Time for these hands to come off the frame.
Through, and I am not crazy.
All right, well, as they would say on TV, back to your regularly scheduled programming. During the duration of your game, hitting milestones would get you bonus prizes as well. Like at 1,000 points, you would get this baseball cap. At 32,000 points, you would receive this stunning embroidered shirt. Come on, who needs $32,000 when you could have this shirt? Earlier in the run of the attraction, contestants would also receive a copy of the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire CD-ROM game upon correctly answering the 32,000 point question. But the big question is, what is the grand prize? For those skilled enough to correctly answer all 15 questions, including the 1 million point question, you would receive, drumroll please, a 1 million point leather jacket. Oh, also a Disney Cruise Line trip for 4. This was honestly the best part of the show. Everything else, straight in the trash. Well, I take that back. If anybody's got a 1,000 point hat that they're willing to part with, I will gladly take it off your hands. I do wonder how many people actually got the Disney Cruise Line prize, and if it was for like a week of their choosing, or were they just thrown on a cruise at the most inconvenient time possible? I don't know.
I'm actually here in Florida on the set of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Play It at the Disney MGM Studios. This set is so phenomenal. Every day, thousands of people come to see the thrill of the game, to experience it on a set that looks exactly like the one I play on in New York. It is amazing. I cannot tell the difference. And the game is very similar. There are a few exceptions. They don't phone a friend. They phone a complete stranger here. And you don't win any money here, but you win the coolest prizes, like a trip on a Disney cruise line. Pretty nice, huh? But listen, guys, join me out in the park. Let's see what's going on. Come on, Regis, Kelly.
The grand prize was changed at some point to tickets for 2 to a live taping of the show in New York, although it was not disclosed if the airfare and lodging was included with this prize. Both of these grand prizes were heavily advertised along with the in-park game show itself.
Other notable aspects of the show was the production team. Much like you'll still see at Indiana Jones' Epic Stunt Spectacular today, there is some fake film/TV production going on that they want us to believe is real. To the point where at Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It, they had an actor portraying a director who would lie to guests' faces and say that Regis was talking directly to the audience via live camera feed.
Great, let's get ready for Regis, everybody. In 5, 4, 3, and go.
Oh, boy. Oh, this guy's a great writer. Ooh, I love him. Hey, I'll be out there to join you in just a few minutes, and this is going to be great. I ask you 15 questions, you get them all right, you win $1 million. Just like that.
Whoa, $1 million points, not dollars.
Points?
That's right. You get points for each question that you answer correctly. The more points you have, the more pins and prizes you win.
Oh, you mean like these plastic flowers? How nice. You spared no expense again, Mary.
Because of prior commitments, Regis was not your host. After all, this experience did run daily in both California and Florida, making it impossible for him to be at both. Instead, Disney trained the cast members hosting the show to just act like Regis. Another aspect of the show itself that saw a drastic change was the phone a friend lifeline. In the case of the Real TV game show, contestants would have a friend or family member on standby to receive a call.
Okay, so that goes on the hip.
Hello? Hello, Tom? Yes. Hi, Regis Philbin here from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
And if there was an answering machine, they could just call again or have a backup, and it would simply be edited out with the magic of pre-taped television. But during the 25-minute theme park version of the show, they needed a new plan. So Disney installed a phone just outside of the soundstage that contestants could call for the now named Phone a Complete Stranger lifeline.
And I'm sure that worked wonderfully, with no issues whatsoever.
It was located near the entrance of the attraction, and who knows, it was probably a cast member located near the Fast Pass return who just picked up the phone anyway. Disney's verbiage surrounding this feature was always talked about like it was somewhere throughout the park, leading people to believe that a payphone could just ring near Interventions at Epcot and some random stranger would pick it up. Well, actually, that's exactly what happened during the 2001 Summer Jam Concert Series TV special. What is probably my new favorite piece of Disney Parks media, this TV special is wild. To promote the recently opened Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It at MGM Studios, actor and singer of the famous rock band Sugar Ray, Mark McGrath would guest host the theme park game show in this crazy segment.
Now, you know, I've been in the hot seat with Regis, but now it's my turn to ask the questions. For a cool $1 million points, who's jamming next on Summer Jam? Is it BB Mac, Sugar Ray, I like those guys, Baha Men, or Dream?
I think I want to use a lifeline, man. I need to call a friend, dude.
We phone a complete stranger here at the Disney MGM Studios.
Okay,
Let's give it a try.
Stored. This.
Hello, Bob in here. Hello, this is Mark McGrath, and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Play it. I have the guys from Sugar Ray here in the hot seat, and they need your help, sir.
We're about to go on stage, man. I can't talk right now. Call back later.
Okay, see you. Bye.
Didn't work out, the phone a friend. What are you gonna do, Craig?
I think I'm gonna say C. Baha Man. That's my final answer.
That's your final answer. Always wanted to say that. Yes, see the Baha Man it is.
Here's the shield.
After construction was completed for the new soundstage at California Adventure, the attraction was set to open the second week of September 2001. I don't think I have to tell you what happens next. But at that exact moment, there was a sudden massive dip in tourism worldwide, which was the last thing that Disney Parks needed after the mess that was the opening of California Adventure. While Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It saw mostly full crowds out in California, it was sadly decided that it was not worth the money to keep it open after just 3 short years. After its closure, the soundstage was later used for a character show called Dancin' with Disney. where guests could cool down from the hot California sun, enjoy some AC, and dance with some of their favorite Disney characters. Since then, this soundstage has mostly sat empty, aside from a few special events as well as this pop-up store. During the worldwide shutdown in 2020, both Disney World and Disneyland shut down. While Disney World started easing their parks back open a few months after the shutdown, Disneyland really decided to take their time. During the phased opening of Disneyland, California Adventure was oddly used as a shopping center, sort of. Basically only using the park for guests to walk around and do some shopping in their gift shops. It's during this time that World of Disney over at Downtown Disney had a second location. That location was none other than the former Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It soundstage, granting guests a close-up look on this Disney relic. Once leaving this pop-up gift shop, you'd be able to see this massive Play It illuminated and hanging just by the exit. I know this is like barely anything, but I absolutely love that they did this little hint just one time, just once. As I had mentioned before, the game show in Orlando would be replaced by Toy Story Mania. On August 19th of 2006, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It saw its final show. During the opening moments of the final show, the producer invited all former hosts who were in attendance down to the hot seat to say their goodbyes, and they were met with thunderous applause. Unfortunately, there are not many permanent nods to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It at MGM Studios. But if Hulu's release schedule lines up right, you might just find a billboard for the most recent reboot of the show starring Jimmy Kimmel. Although this hot seat was retired for good, this would not be the end of game show-based attractions at MGM Studios. Just 3 years later, another groundbreaking reality-based game show made its way to the park. American Idol experience debuted in February of 2009, where theme park guests could sing their heart out for a chance at fame and fortune. After 5 short years, the American Idol experience sang its swan song to make way for a stage show based on an extremely popular modern classic film. What would turn out to be the frozen nail in the coffin for game shows at Disney parks, the Frozen Sing-Along Celebration had done it. Will we ever see a game show-based attraction return to the Disney parks? Well, I think the better question is, what game show is even worthy of a theme park attraction? Just so I know you made it all the way to the end of this video, please let me know in the comments down below what popular game show you'd like to see implemented within the Disney parks. It could literally be anything, but just so I know you made it this far, let me know below. Thank you so much to all of my wonderful Patreon pity viewers. If you're looking for more ways to support the channel, definitely check out that link below, which is also where you can find my brand new exclusive vlog from San Diego Comic-Con, which is only on Patreon, as well as the entire backlog of all of these fun videos. Or if you are looking for more theme park based history videos that are absolutely free, how about that one right there? Or this one. This one's definitely one of my favorites. I am Ryan. This has been For the Love of Theme Parks, and I will see you guys real soon. Bye.
C15, G15. Oh, that's the end for the A-frame, wasn't it? So it's just beat left, then G15.
Here's a question. What's the first thing you think of when I say the words adult animation? animation. What's the first thing that pops into your head? If you live in North America, or any English-speaking country for that matter, the first thing you probably thought of was adult comedies. The Simpsons, Family Guy, South Park, Rick and Morty, these are by far the most popular form of adult animation we have, being adult because of their vulgar sense of humor or relevant pop culture parodies, and absolutely topping the charts in terms of viewers and publicity. Publicity that isn't always good though, because if there's anything most people know about these shows, it's that they don't look all that great. In fact, ask someone to name the worst looking piece of animation they've ever seen, and they might tell you something like Big Mouth. There are millions of videos dunking on shows like these for their distasteful art style or just overall lack of quality. And the best of the best are typically only okay, fine looking, but nothing special. The second kind of adult animation that you might have thought of then is a bit different. You have stuff like Arcane, Castlevania, Invincible, shows that are adult because of violence or dark, mature themes, with more focus on long, intricate storylines than episodic sitcom-style adventures, and a much better reputation for visual quality. Yet, these are infinitely more rare than the cheap, cash-grab animated sitcoms that seem to get pumped out, and they take an enormous amount of effort to make. Arcane being in production for 6 years, and Invincible only putting out about 4 episodes once in a blue moon. But America isn't really the country known for this kind of animation, now is it? Because the much more obvious second thing that you might have been thinking about is anime. It's not a wholly unfair comparison. Japan has one of the largest animation industries in the world, right next to the US, and has an impressive amount of cultural exchange and influence worldwide. I mean, we all know who Goku is, you've seen a Pokemon before, there's a lot of crossover between the industries. But notably, there's a lot more really good adult anime out there. Adult anime that seems to be made faster, higher quality, and with more variety than most things America can put out, despite the whole industry being overall smaller than the US's. Like, don't get me wrong, Invincible looks pretty good, but I can go to any random seasonal show in Japan and it's probably gonna look just as good and also have a minimum of 12 episodes out a year. Arcane is like the best looking thing ever, but in the time it took them to make 9 episodes, Vinland Saga put out 48 that are by no means bad looking. There's some people out there who would say that anime is just objectively superior to Western animation, like as an art form, and that's insane. Go watch a Spider-Verse movie and get back to me. But in terms of adult stuff, it's certainly really far ahead. So much so that people confuse well-made adult animation in the US with anime all the time. Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft, a new show recently announced to be made by the studio behind Castlevania, was called the Tomb Raider anime despite being made in Austin, Texas. Castlevania even had the same thing happen, with the creators being adamant that they had people in the anime industry working on the show. I mean, I don't want to get into the whole what is an anime discussion. You want to say that Tomb Raider having an anime art style makes it one? Sure, that's valid. I don't care. But the fact that these shows get called anime so often, to the point that Netflix made a documentary called Enter the Anime just to promote them, kinda says everything you need to know. So I want to get to the bottom of this. I want to see why adult animation in the West seems to be so far behind anime when it comes to production and popularity. And more than that, I want to go through the history and context behind these two industries, talk about how anime and cartoons developed in these two major places, and figure out why they're so different. Because I think that context can give us a greater understanding and appreciation for the art form. And if you're interested in that too, then let's just get right into it. Part 1. The entire history of animation in the US and Japan. Specifically regarding adult stuff, it's interesting, I promise. Please don't skip ahead. Animation as we know it was pioneered mostly in the US. Maybe not invented, since there's experiments in moving pictures going back hundreds of years, but certainly turned into an industry in the one place that's really good at doing that. One John Bray opened up an animation studio in 1914, literally patenting the process of moving pictures. Because the other thing the US is really good at letting you do is abuse copyright. Earl Hurd, an animator at Bray's studio, officially invented the cell animation method, where in order to get a moving picture with many layers, you would paint everything onto clear sheets of celluloid. And Max Fleischer, out of that same studio, came up with the idea of rotoscoping, taking live-action film and drawing over it in order to get more realistic movement. Many innovations came out of early 20th century American animation studios, up until in the 1920s, when a young animator named Walt Disney would start making stuff out of his garage and eventually work his way up to founding his own, taking a risk on a big theatrical animation called Snow White. And I don't think you need to hear the rest. Snow White became the highest grossing film of its time, and Disney basically owns the world at this point. Now, early animation, while adding color and sound and voice acting and all these things, was still strictly a theater experience all the way up until the 1950s. because, you know, TV wasn't really a thing until then. So at first it was these short little animated segments that would play in between other movies and just kind of fill out time at the theater, eventually leading up to full feature-length Disney productions. But when TV did become a thing, airing those old cartoon shorts and movies as reruns became very, very popular, especially among children. So the natural progression was to start making cartoons specifically for those children in the early 50s, starting out as 5-minute shorts and eventually working their way up to full-length TV episodes, slotted right into the Saturday morning television block so you could watch them while eating your breakfast. One problem though. Making an entire television series at the same quality you were making a single short before wasn't feasible, so the idea of limited animation comes into play, where instead of drawing every single frame of a show, you would draw every other frame, sometimes every third frame, and then let everything sit still for a bit if not a lot was happening. Maybe reuse some cells here and there, cutting down on the workload and allowing a lot more to get done at the expense of looking cheaper.
That's the way to pitch, Rags. Now here's your big chance. One hit and we win the game.
This caused a big split in the way that animation was handled across the board, because one part of the industry, like Hanna-Barbera in the 60s, started focusing on limited animation, making tons and tons of episodes of shows like Huckleberry Hound for incredibly cheap, like less than $3,000 an episode cheap, going so far as to record all the sound in one day to keep everything under cost. And the other part of the industry, namely Disney, went all out on full animation with movies like Cinderella, which rotoscoped basically the entire thing to try and look as good as possible and cost over $2 million to make. Meanwhile, in Japan, they were still recovering from that whole World War II thing, and being occupied by the US for so long meant that a lot of American media made its way over and started exerting its influence. In particular, a young man named Osamu Tezuka became fascinated with cartoonists like Disney, taking up drawing and making comic books specifically to try and become a big famous creative like him. In the late 40s, Tezuka started publishing manga, and by the 50s he was fairly successful, with hits like Kimba the White Lion, New Treasure Island, and Ambassador Adam, one of which is most famous for a Your Movie Sucks video, and the other for featuring this little kid character that would go on to get his own spin-off in 1952, known in the West as Astro Boy. So manga as a medium fucking explodes. Tezuka's works are incredibly popular, more so than any artists of the last few decades. And while manga is blowing up, animation starts to get going as well. Specifically, a new company calling themselves Toei forms in 1956 with the bright idea to operate like an American animation studio. And by American Animation Studio, I mean Disney. They also wanted to be Disney. Everybody wanted to be Disney. In the early 60s, after getting their footing, Toei starts cranking out yearly animated movies based on popular folktales. Magic Boy, Alakazam the Great, Arabian Nights, the good old Disney formula. However, Alakazam the Great, also known as Sayuki, was actually based on one of Tezuka's works, an adaptation of Journey to the West, and so he was brought on to the production to help them out, something that proved to be incredibly important to the history of animation, as Tezuka immediately fell in love with the medium. Though, while there are conflicting accounts, pretty much everything you'll hear about the production of Sayuki is chaos. Tezuka didn't feel like they had any creative control, other animators felt like Tezuka didn't do anything, and everyone was forced by the strict deadline that Toei gave them to finish the movie within the year. So, the man did probably the most Disney thing you could possibly do after this, and just started his own studio, Mushi Productions, then just poached all the animators he liked from Toei and went and did his own thing with them. Having such a bad experience with Toei though, Tezuka didn't like the idea of trying to be like Disney anymore. Or at least he didn't want to make big movies on tight schedules. So looking into other kinds of stuff to make, he reached back to the 1958 show Felix the Cat, which featured much simpler artwork, very few frames of animation, and long ongoing stories, much like the weekly serialized comics Tezuka was already familiar with. It was a match made in heaven, and the first show that Mushi produced on a weekly basis was their heavy hitter, Astro Boy. So just like manga, now television animation fucking explodes, becoming so popular that several more TV animation studios opened the year Astro Boy came out, with Toei even scrambling to start their own TV division just to compete, which was probably pretty hard after Tezuka stole all their employees. This marks an important distinction though, right? Animation in the US started on film and moved to TV over time, but the movies were still where all the focus was. These big budget features that attracted up-and-coming artists. So much so that the California Institute of the Arts was partially founded by Walt Disney as a pipeline to funnel talent into his studio. Meanwhile, Japanese animation took the form of TV and movies, but the television side was infinitely more popular, being helmed by the god of manga himself, who focused primarily on limited animation and tight budgets, with a lot of talent getting their start in the industry helping him. Or, more specifically, getting their start working at Toei and then getting poached or leaving to go somewhere else. But then the other distinguishing factor that was majorly changing things was censorship. Despite how childish and quaint they might seem today, cartoons in the 10s, 20s, and 30s were actually very raunchy and mature. Betty Boop was a jazz-age flapper who constantly lost her skirt. Talkertoon's Bimbo was a sleazy womanizer, and Felix the Cat once tried to kill himself because he got a woman pregnant, in a very real short that came out in 1919. But with the Hays Code being enacted in 1934, something I've talked about at length, they put a stop to all of this. In response to criticisms from religious groups and the government, it prohibited almost everything that would have made animation more adult. Violence, sexuality, deadbeat dad-induced suicide, the whole lot. And fast forward to 1968, just when the Hays Code disbanded and TV cartoons became popular, you then have the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., which drove the US media wild all over again, especially towards depictions of violence in movies and television, causing such an upset around kids' media in particular that eventually television networks had people sit in on script meetings for animated shows to manually approve each episode, something they continue to do forever. You were not allowed to show violence. You were not allowed to imply violence. An episode of Josie and the Pussycats that aired in 1970 had to be rewritten because it featured a cat hiding in a bowl of spaghetti, and network censors said it would encourage kids to shove cats into spaghetti. That is a near direct quote. This is made worse by the fact that limited animation cartoons were entirely dependent on advertising revenue from cereal companies and other family-friendly brands, which only played in the Saturday morning and after-school blocks, making these blocks so competitive that the networks could maintain an iron grip on what shows got aired, letting them do whatever they wanted to your series because you couldn't put it out anywhere else. And all of this was on top of the already existing Comics Code Authority, which had started in the 50s, and had prohibited all that same adult content in any print media that wanted a mainstream release, effectively barring anything adult in any medium from getting its feet off the ground. Now, I'm not going to say there was zero censorship ever in Japan, or that you could do whatever the fuck you wanted. There have been some high-profile cases of shows being taken off the air, or manga being thrown out of store shelves, but this never got as big as it did in the US. And more importantly, it never really led to any active legislation or monitoring of what people could make. I mean, Tezuka had been adding adult jokes and themes to his works since basically the beginning. He included cross-dressing and androgynous characters in his early stories, and even an interracial kiss in Angel Gunfighter in 1949. In fact, he actually got quite upset that the American network said Astro Boy was too violent, one person reportedly calling the titular character a murderer because they destroyed other robots, a criticism that wasn't a thing when the show aired in its home country. In the 70s, anime actually started opening up to more mature themes following Tezuka, where Western cartoons did the opposite, which naturally opened the gates for artists in Japan to experiment with appealing to an older audience, culminating in the revolution that was the Gekiga movement. A short Japanese lesson, manga directly translates to something like whimsical pictures, and basically refers to kids' comics with rounded faces like Tezuka made. Gekiga means something like dramatic pictures, and has a more realistic, serious art style made for adults. We call all Japanese comics manga now, but for a good while there was a big distinction. So with Gekiga coined as a term by Yoshihiro Tatsumi in the 50s, he and his collaborators sought to make comics something that wasn't just for kids, telling stories of anti-authoritarianism and class struggle, and containing violence and shocking imagery. Many of these stories, like Ninja Bugecho by Sanpei Shirato or Takeo Saito's Golgo 13, becoming so influential that they inspired Tezuka himself to start writing works made for adults. Just focusing on Golgo 13 for a bit actually, it's a simple comic about a professional assassin who violently kills people, and it's the second highest selling Japanese comic of all time, just under One Piece. It also has a world record for number of volumes published. Gekiga basically caused a whole subset of the industry to mature overnight, with magazines like Garo and Tezuka's own Calm publishing these adult works to a broad audience. an audience that was then receptive to even more mature themes in their anime, like with Ashita no Joe, Lupin III, and Space Battleship Yamato. Another big anime studio that I haven't even talked about, Tatsunoko Productions, even experimented with Animentary Ketsudan in 1971. The first word of that title literally being anime and documentary shoved together, as it was an animated recounting of World War II history, talking about different battles in the Pacific all the way from Pearl Harbor to Japan's surrender. Mushi Productions even went so far as to create Anime Rama, a trilogy of movies made for adult audiences, including the first X-rated animated film in Japan, Belladonna of Sadness, which features full-on nudity, sexual assault, and depictions of Satanism. And I want to be clear, it did not do well. Cult classic now, a lot of people love it, but it's also partly responsible for Mushi going bankrupt the same year it came out. They might have gone too far in a few places. Now, funnily enough, the US actually did have this same sort of adult counterculture movement at around the same time, and I've actually talked about it before. It's the underground comics scene. Created mostly as a response to the censorship of the Comics Code Authority, it brought a bunch of violent, edgy stories to a mass audience, which alongside the Hays Code shutting down, resulted in big, adult-focused animations like Ralph Bakshi's Fritz the Cat, The Beatles' Yellow Submarine, and possibly my favorite title for a short film ever, Mickey Mouse in Vietnam.
What the fuck?
But these animations, yet again, were entirely limited to theaters, either full-length movies like what Ralph Bakshi was making, or short animated vignettes. And none of them, after Fritz, ever hit that same high. They were all independent productions that came out to smaller and smaller returns, and nothing ever crossed over to television. Bakshi's work still had a major effect on the industry. Fritz made over $100 million after all, but adult animation just didn't take off after it. And this is because of a big difference on just a fundamental level that I think sets these two industries apart. Structure. Because the anime industry was, and still is, incredibly fluid. There isn't a clear dividing line between movies or television or comic books or even live action. Someone will create a manga or light novel that gets popular enough for someone else to turn it into an anime series. That might even get popular enough for a film adaptation. And pretty much all animation was still limited. So the transition from show to movie wasn't that hard. An animator or studio who starts off on TV might go on to make movies and then come back to television years later. A famous movie star will play an anime character in their live-action adaptation. It doesn't really matter. It's all just part of this big ecosystem. One that was already incredibly popular with all audiences and had a broadening demographic focus. Since television and manga don't even have age rating systems, just different shelves and time slots they get put in, making them much more open to everyone, even if something is intended for a specific group, which allows audiences to experiment and watch different types of shows and movies, even adult ones, very easily. But in the US, that's not the case. Animated movies and TV were still considered very different. One was big budget spectacle that was now getting to be so expensive it had to appeal to the broadest audience possible, while the other was so dependent on advertising and network censors it couldn't get away with anything. The crossover was much more limited, both between animators and the properties they were animating, so people working in the industry just stuck to their lane, rarely branching out. There was no real crossover with live action, which meant that Hollywood got all the big mature stories, and they didn't even have the ability to rely on comic books like anime could rely on manga, which further stifled the variety of what was getting made. This all bleeds into the audience for animation in the West, who get so used to the one type of it that's consistently popular and profitable that they just start to associate all animation with kids shows and Disney movies. So even though Belladonna of Sadness was a flop and Fritz the Cat was a hit, the structure surrounding these two industries allowed adult anime to keep going where adult cartoons were held back. Belladonna was an evolution of the already existing mature content in anime, an experiment that could be repeated by theoretically any studio that had the resources, and audiences were growing more and more receptive to that kind of thing. Whereas Fritz the Cat was explicitly counterculture, a deviation from what cartoons were supposed to be, a one-of-a-kind flashbang of a film that nobody could even fathom becoming the norm. Going forward, anime directors would get the money and talent to make something like Belladonna again, but nobody had the power to change the West's perception of cartoons, confining the medium to a box that it didn't really break out of until decades later.
Cut, 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 cut! What the hell
was wrong with that cake?
Also, just as a tangent, this difference in structure makes it so much more difficult to talk about adult-oriented animation comparatively, because with both countries having such different age rating systems, it's hard to define what even is adult when it comes to anime compared to cartoons. I mean, the term Gekiga is basically dead at this point, spoilers, so the thing to replace it was seinen compared to shonen anime. Golgo 13 now being officially labeled as a seinen manga, even though I think Takeo Saito would hate to call it that. But manga demographics don't often tell you the adultness of a work, because something like Spy Family, a wholesome story about a psychic child and her secret agent parents, was published right alongside Fire Punch, which is about a man surviving in the post-apocalypse while being constantly burned alive. Both of those are available to the same people, even though they appeal to different audiences. Pretty much the only hard distinction we have over who can watch what is Japan's film rating board, Eirin, which rates anything with a theatrical or home release, giving stuff a 15 or 18 plus if it's too over the top. But because what they consider over the top isn't even close to what the US thinks is over the top, stuff like Prison School and End of Evangelion got a G rating. So just going forward, when I'm talking about adult anime, I am talking about it from a Western perspective. Anime that is comparable in nature to adult shows in the US or would have a similar audience. Jujutsu Kaisen might be a shonen manga made for teen boys, but they also murder people, so I'd say it's fair to compare that with Invincible. Prison School might have a G rating, but a lot of kids in North America grow up watching Family Guy. The way we classify something as adult in both countries is very different, so a lot of it is up for debate. What's not up for debate though, at least in terms of adult anime, is like anything made in the 80s. Because with VHS and home video becoming this huge behemoth, a lot of people realized you didn't even have to go through the big networks at all. Despite not being as strict as the US, Japan still had limits on what you could show on TV or film. Networks and publishers still had final say on what aired, so extreme content was unlikely to get past them. But none of those limitations would apply to you if you just went straight to home video. And so the original video animation, or OVA, starts becoming a thing. And another one of the main freedoms of making an OVA was that you were no longer bound by the production deadlines and extra costs of television or movies. As long as you could keep your studio afloat and make your money back, you could make whatever and take however long to do it. Something that was especially easy with Japan's economy hitting all-time highs. So this opens the floodgates on experimental mature animation, and a ton of it comes out in quick succession. Dalos, released in 1983 and considered to be the first OVA, is a sci-fi drama depicting our heroes committing acts of space terrorism. Vampire Hunter D in 1985 was marketed as the first anime movie for adults because of its extreme violence and full nudity. Angel's Egg, that very same year, comes out with a similar abstract existential style to Belladonna of Sadness. Still didn't do well though. Mamoru Oshii was like blacklisted from the industry for several years after directing it, but hey, you gotta give him props for trying. After all, OVAs in general were making more money than ever. In 1983, the Japanese home video market pulled in about 2.7 billion yen in sales. By 1993, that number was 41.5 billion. And a large chunk of those sales come from the real adult anime that started to come out. Because as I said before, OVAs aren't held back by any restrictions on what they can include, aside from the law itself. So they were, of course, also responsible for the proliferation of animated hentai. Lolita Anime from 1984 is widely considered to be the first OVA of this kind, and immediately following it is the Cream Lemon series, which popularized animated hentai and the sexual bishoujo subgenre all the way until today. Now, this isn't the kind of video to cover that material in depth. I've talked about that stuff before. So with hentai and all of the stuff that followed it, this explosion of graphic content in the mid to late 80s should make it clear just how different things got between the US and Japanese industries. The US had some breakout hits that shook things up, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, a movie that called back to the golden age of animation and blended it with a more noir-inspired Hollywood story. Also, Heavy Metal, which is a sci-fi fantasy anthology film inspired by a comics magazine of the same name. That one's made in Canada though, so fuck you, you can't have it. Yet, at the same time as all of this, Japan was putting out Wicked City and Urotsukidoji Legend of the Overfiend, which had excessive gore and erotic violence right alongside its heavy action and dramatic storylines, which is leagues beyond anything the US would ever think to animate. So much so that Urotsukidoji got screened at the Toronto International Film Festival, where Variety reviewed it saying, "Films like these are why the word misogynist was invented." Though the US's reaction to hardcore animation like Urotsukidoji never stopped it from becoming popular. In fact, a lot of OVAs became popular in the West for both adult and younger audiences, since there were still a lot of non-adult series being put out on video. The widespread release of all of these VHS tapes, laser discs, and later DVDs meant that there were a lot of people working to translate, subtitle, and re-release them internationally, which, just like how US culture seeped its way into Japan, spread the good word of anime all across the United States. Something that culminates in the release of Akira, this massive, big-budget production helmed by the creator of the manga himself, Katsuhiro Otomo, having super fluid animation that was uncommon in anime at the time, as well as heavily detailed artwork alongside a mature political story that was very reminiscent of Gekiga. And most importantly, it was a cyberpunk story that looked cool as fuck. Akira was a big hit in the US, becoming an instant cult classic despite not being a mega blockbuster. Whether it was that or Orotsuka Doji or Bubblegum Crisis or any of the other anime that got a Western release, something started to crack the pristine, family-friendly shell that US animation had started to build up. Well, that and the creation of MTV. Founded in 1981, Music Television was a network that aired, well, music videos. A lesser YouTuber would have made the joke that some of you might not remember this because they stopped doing that in the 2000s, but I'm better than that. Also in the 2000s, I was a child. The whole channel being dedicated to rock and pop music in the 80s and 90s.
Okay. That is going to do it for tonight. I realize I'm totally out of frame here. Let me get these guys back in frame, back in shot. There's my dramatic scene. I like the way that looks actually. Let me capture this from above. I need to get a stand for the Epyon. So it can, properly stand up. But that's going to do it for tonight. Oh, no, wait, actually, I lied. Let me go ahead and experiment with the transformation here. Let me get these two posed and they better stand. Actually, better lighting rather, that's what I mean. I'm gonna put these over here. I'll be right back. I say to my audience with nobody. because that's a very hard pose for you. Okay, let's do this. Oh, that's stupid. Get you back over here, Epyon. Okay, let's take you off your stand here.
'90s meant that it had a certain edge to it, one that was being pushed by one of its co-founders, Fred Siebert, who loved the idea of mimicking the aesthetics of local radio stations. And it was partly his decision to animate the 10-second network identifications that played in between the videos because, quote, cartoons seemed to be the closest visual equivalent to rock and roll. The 10 years of MTV that dominated television stations during the 80s pretty much defined the sort of weird, offbeat style of animation that would crop up coming into the 90s. Because as music videos started to die down, MTV replaced them with Liquid Television in '91, their dedicated anthology show that featured a rotating cast of short, strange-looking cartoons. One such cartoon was Aeon Flux, an avant-garde sci-fi series that took heavy inspiration from German Expressionism and featured much more violent and sexual material than any animated TV in the US at the time. You also had adult comedies like Beavis and Butthead, dark superheroes like The Max, alongside a ton of one-off shorts by various artists. It makes sense that the transition from music video to adult animation would be smoother than starting from children's cartoons, and so where Hanna-Barbera and Disney were the standard before, now MTV became the blueprint for everything animated and adult, even today. I mean, Fred Siebert went on to become the last president of Hanna-Barbera in 1992, up until the company was absorbed by Warner Bros., during which time he started his own self-named studio, Frederator. But alongside rock and roll aesthetics comes the birth of something equally important, the adult animated sitcom, a cartoon version of the largest television genre in America, and seemingly only America, because almost nowhere else has it consistently topped ratings charts for the better part of half a century. But it did, and so naturally people thought to replicate this success outside of live action, resulting in one of the most famous animated shows of all time. Say it with me now, The Flintstones. Released in 1960 and made by Hanna-Barbera, this goofy little series featuring a family from the Stone Age would air on ABC as the first primetime cartoon ever, becoming immediately popular with both children and adults and capturing the sitcom formula and audience perfectly. It's incorrectly cited as being the first sitcom to show the couple sleeping in the same bed together, but despite that, it did genuinely push forward people's perception of animation. And turns out, anything that resembles I Love Lucy just does really well, so the Flintstones became the most profitable, most successful, and longest running network animated franchise in the US for 3 decades. Up until The Simpsons. Now, you might have heard that The Simpsons started on the Tracy Ullman Show. That's a fun piece of trivia people like to throw around.
The original Simpsons shorts, they were like interstitials for another show.
Wait, really? I actually didn't know that.
But that Tracy Ullman appearance was born out of a combination of success of the last two things we talked about. Tracy Ullman was a very popular British comedy actress in the 80s, who had started multiple series in Britain before moving to the US in 1987, and with the help of producer James L. Brooks, decided to pitch her own sketch comedy program for the then brand new network Fox. The show was pretty experimental with a lot of its bits, and so when thinking of a way to transition from one to another, or from a sketch into a commercial break, in part due to the recent success of MTV, one of the first things that came to mind was animated shorts. In particular, a weird yellow dysfunctional family that was drawn up by comic strip creator Matt Groening.
Hold it, everybody. Forgot to say grace.
Hey, good drink, good meat. Good God, let's eat.
These animated shorts then proved to be so popular that they would become their own full-fledged segment on the show, before getting spun off into their own. And so popular that Tracy Ullman would later sue The Simpsons for a share of their profits. Which is fair. I think I'd probably do that too after seeing how much money it made. The Flintstones was already a surprisingly mature cartoon for the time it was around, but The Simpsons is really what took the idea of the animated sitcom and ran with it. And one of the reasons it became so forward-thinking and adult-oriented was because it was created at just the right time when Fox as a network was still really young. So James L. Brooks, leveraging his success from Tracy Ullman and years of experience, was actually able to secure a contract that made sure the network was unable to interfere with the writing of the show, in what I think is pretty much a first for animation since network censors became a thing. They couldn't get away with everything, they still had to cut stuff, but they got away with a lot more than every other show that came before, which is a pretty big turning point for adult animation in the West, and why pretty much every show I'll talk about from here on will be able to trace some lineage back to this dysfunctional yellow family. That, or the two other shows that set the standard for animation in the 90s, because a lot of important stuff came out then, bear with me. On the kids' side, one John Kricfalusi, who got to start working on Hanna-Barbera shows, and his big break actually working under Ralph Bakshi, pitched a show to Nickelodeon called Ren and Stimpy. This off-the-wall cartoon with an absurdist sense of humor and insanely vulgar and offensive sensibilities. On the adult side, two film students with a shared love of Monty Python wanted to pitch an animated comedy to Fox. It would star 4 kids living in the fictional town of South Park, Colorado. Weirdly enough, Fox seemed more than willing to hear them out, probably because they smelled money coming from another animated sitcom, but Trey Parker and Matt Stone were so adamant that they be allowed to include a talking turd character named Mr. Hanky that they actually fought with the network and lost the deal. So, they went over to basic cable and got picked up by Comedy Central instead. Both of these shows, though obviously very different in many ways, both became known for being way more extreme than anything else. Ren and Stimpy had to cut a lot of bits, like someone burning the United States Constitution, or people smoking cigarettes in like every episode. And South Park, well, South Park has an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to all their controversies, so take your pick. But these shows, alongside Matt Groening's masterpiece and its successors like King of the Hill and Family Guy in 97 and 99, prove that doing an adult or even edgy show that pushed the envelope was actually a profitable thing to do in animation, so long as it was a comedy. You see, the West still hadn't really changed its mind over what cartoons were. Going into the 80s and 90s, there was perhaps even less confusion because of the smash hit success of things like Transformers and Thundercats, shows made primarily to promote toy lines and cereal boxes, which leads to a lot of, just because there isn't a better word for it, insecurity from people who wanted to make cartoons for adults. This insecurity, combined with the legitimate difficulty of getting something like that off the ground, means that the best solution creators could come up with was to make something so extreme and opposite to kids' media that it couldn't be for anybody but adults. Yet violence and nudity were still off the table, so they get left with the only option they have.
Category is people who annoy you.
If there's any comparison to make, the closest anime equivalent would probably be the Gekiga movement. This sort of revolution to try and change people's perception of what this medium could be. But because of those years of insecurity and restrictions on content, these adult works tended to be parodies of themselves instead of legitimate attempts to make something fresh. South Park, Family Guy, Ren and Stimpy, even The Simpsons are all shows born out of the inherent joke that you're looking at what should be family-friendly cartoon characters doing vulgar and insane things. That's where a lot of the humor comes from. It's playing on the audience's expectations. And this works, it becomes insanely popular and paves the way for all of the adult animated shows we see today, but it also keeps the view of animation just as limited. Now animation is no longer just kids shows, it's kids shows and adult comedies, and that's it. None of this has broadened people's views, we've just split them into two equally narrow lanes. The adult lanes still being held back by the idea that you're taking a childish medium and doing something dirty with it, typically in sitcom format. Compare this to what Japan was making at the time, and actually, what was Japan making in the 90s? Neon Genesis Evangelion. I don't know what the fuck that is. The OVA boom of the 80s obviously kept going into the 90s, though with new advancements in digital tech coming shortly after, and also that whole economic collapse because of the bubble economy thing, these indie studios started to shrink down a bit, converging back into the mainstream big network productions. But the influence was still apparent, and anime movies in the 90s became defined by two things. One was a headier, more intellectual focus, as apparent in stuff like Ghost in the Shell, End of Evangelion, and Perfect Blue. Not just mature because they showed boobies and blood everywhere, but also because they were full of nuance and plot threads open to interpretation, suited to be dissected by those older than 12. And the other thing that started to define the era was a further increase in quality of animation, a movement spearheaded by Mamoru Oshii, Satoshi Kon, and Hayao Miyazaki. We're all kind of fed up with the limited style that Tezuka had pioneered, with Miyazaki in particular coming out with Princess Mononoke, the most expensive anime movie ever made, which became the highest grossing anime movie ever made in both Japan and America at the time, despite the fact that it was a serious drama with excessive violence. In fact, when the movie was first playing in America, Harvey Weinstein reportedly reached out to Studio Ghibli to try and pressure them to cut the film down to a PG-13 rating, to which Miyazaki's producer, Toshio Suzuki, reportedly responded by flying to the US, gifting Weinstein a replica katana, and yelling, "No cuts!" Anyways, on the TV side of things, shows followed a similar growth, with Evangelion becoming both such a big hit that it led to a new boom in anime productions, but also being so controversial, violent, and overtly sexual that TV Tokyo started to crack down on adult content in anime. See, when I talked about Japanese TV not having any ratings, I kinda left that it results in them being pretty strict about time slots. Evangelion, for example, actually aired at 6:30 p.m. after school, taking up the slot that used to be filled by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, of all things. In fact, there's a really funny video of the whole Japanese cast of TMNT saying goodbye after the final episode, and then immediately cutting to a commercial for Ava. So TV Tokyo got really mad at Ava for being so unkid-friendly, cracking down on a lot of the shows that came after and more closely monitoring their productions, and taking out a lot of that anger on Cowboy Bebop, which came out a few years later. This time putting their foot down and just not allowing any of the more violent episodes to air, meaning the show only put out half of its 26 episodes out of order on its usual 6 p.m. space, only getting a full release half a year later on Wow Wow, the Japanese equivalent of HBO. This actually became sort of a recurring problem for big TV networks, because they were starting to get nervous about airing such adult stuff during daylight hours. Stuff that wouldn't have been made before, but because of the OVA boom was now incredibly popular. So their solution to this was to open up late night television blocks specifically to run these more mature shows. Cowboy Bebop's Wow Wow run was actually at 1 in the morning. Tokyo TV opened up its 1:15 a.m. slot to shows like Serial Experiments Lain, Trigun, and Boogie Pop Phantom. And Nippon TV opened its first late night block with Berserk 1997 at 1:45. Tokyo TV even opened one of their most famous, or perhaps infamous, subsidiaries, ATX, a premium anime-focused television network that was allowed to get away with showing series fully uncensored during its late-night broadcast, leading to it airing everything from Elfen Lied to High School DxD to Redo of Healer. In the manga space, the 90s was actually probably the closest that Japan really got to American-level censorship regarding adult media, because at the same time these time slot changes were happening, Arrow manga was also subject to the adult comics label, where works that were considered unsafe for kids were given a special R18 mark and their own section in stores, essentially making every magazine either okay for all ages or X-rated hentai. But again, the controversy around adult comics in Japan being around largely pornographic material just goes to show how different things really were. Suffice to say, this tradition of airing anime super late at night became sort of a staple of most TV networks, and actually continues to this day, with pretty much any anime show that's not meant for kids being put out between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. Partly because of those initial restrictions on content, but also because it's much cheaper to air shows at that time, and anime almost always makes most of its money through Blu-ray or manga sales anyways. And you're probably familiar with the US's attempt at late-night animated programming because it became even more influential, in particular with Cartoon Network's Adult Swim and Toonami. The latter was actually created specifically as a programming block to host one show, which then moved over to the former. That show being Space Ghost Coast to Coast, a series spawned entirely from the decision of Cartoon Network executives to create a cartoon that appealed to adults, to compete with the likes of Beavis and Butthead and The Simpsons. The person they asked, Mike Lazo, decided to use old clips they had from Hanna-Barbera cartoons, specifically Space Ghost from 1966, alongside some clever editing and image manipulation to create an entirely new program, where this mass...
Thank you all very much for joining me on this, as I've done this. I'll be back. I don't know when I'll be back. Might do a midweek stream, I don't know. I want to build the mini claw Kerberos Voyager from Q Ranger as a breather build basically. So I'll do that whenever I build next. Might be midweek, might just be next Saturday, I don't know. But that'll be my next project. Then I'll dive into something a little more complex. I'll have to figure out what. Let's see. I'll figure it out. I've got Kuga, and I've got the Kuga in the backlog, and I've got that big one, Psycho Gundam, in the backlog to build. Then I've also got. I recently got in the One Tiger. I got Might Gunner, and I got. What else did I get? What was the third one? Shit, one sec. Tetra Boy, that's what it was. My Gunner, Tetra Boy, and One Tiger are in my backlog pile as well as Kuga Dragon Form. Dragon Form, and Psycho Gundam. So yeah, I'll knock some stuff out. I'll get to it next week. Until then, thank you all very much for coming out. Have a great night. I will see you.